Welcome, everyone. My guest today is Managing Editor James Kleimann to talk about inventory and how the industry is getting creative to find, build, develop, and create more housing.
We may have just gotten back from Gathering of Eagles, but we're not done with events for 2023 yet. This October, we're headed right back to Austin, Texas for HousingWire Annual, and we want to see you there. We've got a power-packed agenda with content such as our Women of Influence speakers, peak performer playbooks, CEO playbooks, and more to propel your company forward, as well as a bunch of networking events. Because this event is open to real estate executives, mortgage, title, and everyone in between, you really have the opportunity to network with people from all across the housing ecosystem. If you want to learn more about the event, or if you're already ready to get registered, head over to housingwire.com on the events tab and you can learn all about it. Not to mention, if you're an HW Plus member, you're going to get 50% off your ticket. So get registered for HW Plus and get registered for the event so we can see you out in Austin.
James, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, good to be back.
Great to have you back, and I appreciate you joining even when you have a sinus infection. Don't feel great. You're in the full editor mode today, despite that, even on a holiday week. So I always appreciate that.
When you have young kids, you're always sick.
That is so true. That is so true. They're just like germ factories.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to talk about one of the things that has been dominating the news for the last, 6 months, but especially over the last month, has been housing inventory. So we now get Altos research data, which tracks weekly housing inventory across the country. And so on our housing market tracker this week, we published the fact that we are now at negative year-over-year numbers. And it's down like 5 times since this week last year, the number of homes available for sale. So we're in this crazy environment. And we had reporter Bill Conroy write a story about this, which was called "The Hunt for Housing Inventory is in Full Safari Mode." And I thought it was a fantastic piece I would love to talk about.
Yeah, I think you set it up pretty well, which is we've known for quite some time. Anyone who is an industry professional who deals with a marketplace like this doesn't need me to tell them that this is a really, really supply-constrained market. And as a result, you got to get creative. You got to find really robust, reliable sources of business. And right now, that's really difficult if you specialize in single-family for-sale homes, especially existing home sales. So my recollection is the most recent Altos data had, I think it was 455,000 single-family homes on the market as of Friday. And a year ago, around that time, it was about 459,000. And it's up a little bit from January, but that's not good. It's really, really bad. You want to see that number about more than double that, like at minimum double that. And so if you're a real estate agent, if you're a mortgage loan officer, and this is the marketplace that you're facing, what used to be your timeline for finding a client, getting them inside the house, maybe a couple months, 6 months, I think is like pretty normal in a lot of markets. You got to find the house, you got to negotiate, go back and forth on contingencies. In certain areas of this country, when I talk to agents and LOs, they say, we talk years now. So I was chatting with a loan officer who's in the Boston area, and she was griping about the fact that if you don't have $1.25 million and are willing to say, okay, to whatever the seller asks for, you're not going to buy the house. And if you're an agent, you probably want to specialize either being the listing agent or being a really, really, really solid buy-side agent and having a wealth of options available, because your clients, I don't mean to like overly dramatize this, but they're going to war, like they're still facing 30, 40, 50 buyers, and a lot of them have all cash. And so you really have to have a game plan. You have to have a strategy. You need to be looking at not just what your financial picture looks like today and maybe in a couple months down the line, but a year from now, 5 years from now. How long are you going to have that house? If it's going to be less than 5 years, you might as well just rent. And it's not like anyone's being saved by the rental market either. A lot of the same conditions exist in rentals, but it's so difficult. And so I think the major question has to be, okay, if we know that a huge swath of existing homeowners have very few incentives to sell, what would make them sell? Or alternatively, where else might we see supply? And so in this feature article that we published this morning, Bill really takes a look at, okay, let's see about new construction. Right now, they're about 30% of the market. Historically, they're closer to 10 to 15%. Are we at a cap? Can they even go beyond the 30%? We're going to get a little bit more into that in a future article that's going to drop later this month. But that's part of it. The home builders are able to offer incentives that the mortgage companies today cannot offer, that existing home sellers will not offer. If you have 20, 30 people knocking on your door, are you going to do seller financing? Absolutely not. You're never going to do that, right? And that's really where you're seeing a lot of the supply in the market right now. However, it's really regionalized. There are no home builders in large portions of this country. Like, they do not exist unless they're specialized luxury home builders and they're building townhouses that start at $1 million. And so then we take a look at some other factors. Okay, why don't we take a look at, let's say, maybe renovated, flipped units? There are definitely some active flippers. It's a tough market. They're affected by interest rates. They're affected by supply chain issues. They're affected by labor issues, just like anybody else would be. But there are definitely the margins. You can do it if you're disciplined, you buy smart, and you're able to get it pretty quickly, because demand is still really, really strong in almost every market.
I do think that they're also, affected by the tight lending environment, right? Tight credit environment. I mean, not everybody wants to lend in that situation right now. And to your point, the interest rates. I thought one of the things that was really interesting about this article is that Bill did talk to some fix and flip investors and also lenders who sort of specialize in that and kind of got their take on this. And the take is like, there's definitely things out there. The question is making it work for, especially like when you think about distressed homes or homes that are in bad shape, right? The vacant homes that are across the country. We hardly ever talk about them unless we're in this sort of environment where it's like, we've got to have some inventory, but there's a reason for that. It's not like they're just sitting there like, oh, they're in this nice neighborhood. I know there might be some, but basically there's a whole bunch of homes, millions of homes, and they might be in places you don't want to live. There's no opportunity to work. I mean, there's a lot of challenges there.
Sure. I mean, if you're really hell-bent on finding a home to live in, you can go to literally the poorest county in West Virginia and you can buy a home for a couple dollars.
Wow.
But what are you going to buy? Are you going to have even reliable internet? Let's say you have that ability to work from home and you want to be able to, not be in the housing rat race. Sure, you could do it. But there's not a lot of opportunity. There are a lot of social problems. There's a reason people aren't buying, selling. There's nothing to sell. They don't have much value. Basically, they'll give them away. And so, I mean, yeah, theoretically, that contributes to the availability of inventory, but it's not inventory that is desirable. And there's no money to be made there. There's no home builder who's going to build something in certain areas of this country. One, because it doesn't pencil out in really super luxury markets, or because in really rural or parts of Appalachia, parts of the South, parts of the Midwest, there's no desire for people to live there.
It reminds me of after we had the housing crash and we had all that inventory, you did have people who like went into Detroit and different parts of Detroit, and by strategically buying different properties, in say two on the same block and then one over, and really created a community whole cloth by having linked properties that they were fixing and flipping so that they're really improving a whole neighborhood, and upping the value and also just upping the desirability of people who want to live there. I thought it was a great strategy. But I mean, that takes somebody who um, has some time and some money, right? That's not a quick fix and flip.
And it takes vision, it takes community, it requires a lot of different stakeholders to buy in. In a lot of cases, it requires competent government. It requires a sense of safety, right? And on
Right.
large portions of Detroit for many years, if you called the police, they wouldn't get to you. And, we're not talking minutes, right? We're talking a much longer period of time. And many people will not take that kind of risk or perceived risk. And so you have to really want to do it. And you have to feel like you're going to have a community that can be, to some extent, kind of self sustaining. And the average person doesn't live their life like that and wouldn't have the vision to be a part of a community like that. So, yeah, stories like that exist. And I think it's very encouraging. And one of the biggest flip areas, and this has been the case for quite some time, is Detroit, because there is still a vibrant art scene. There's still jobs in the area. It's not what it was in 1952, but Detroit is in some ways kind of a success story in reimagining urbanism in the 21st century. But no one who lives there will tell you that it's a utopia and that it's going to be the model for everyone else. So I think it would be great if we were able to have a strategy that puts together federal policies with local state policies that encourage people to repopulate, to use these areas. And, but in a lot of cases, like, you don't have sewage, you don't have running water, you don't have electricity. And like, okay, sure, you could be a homesteader. Maybe you're handy enough to do that kind of thing. But most people, they need a certain, de minimis of infrastructure to build a life. And it's just, it's hard, requires a lot.
One of the places that people are finding ways to create housing is right that for that missing middle is like the ADUs or building on in different parts of the country, you have a pretty big lot size and a small house. If you were built in the 50s, it's like, oh, you got that giant backyard, you got this little house, you can build another little house back there and, house your grandma, house your college students, rent it out, whatever. And we see that, you talked about federal and state policy. We've seen that be very effective in California when they overrode, as a state, they overrode, all the local ordinances. They're like, listen, yes, it's legal and, you can't make it too hard for people. We are still working out a lot of those details, but I mean, you are seeing some interest there and some execution there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of promise with ADUs, especially in urban areas that people want to live. People want to live in LA. I have friends, they're getting married in LA. It is beautiful. They have the best food, I think, anywhere in this country. It is a really vibrant, interesting place. There's a lot of positives you can put there. Housing is not a positive.
Right.
I absolutely, if someone can find me a house for under $1 million in LA, I would love to see it and what condition it's in, because it's, despite the progress made with ADUs, we still have a huge housing shortage in LA, and they have all kinds of other crazy policies that don't go to the furtherance of solving this housing crisis. And so ADUs have a lot of promise. I'm here in Brooklyn, and we have a 3-unit apartment building, 2 guys upstairs, 1 guy's a DJ, 1 guy's an art professor, and we have this big garage in the backyard, tiny little concrete backyard, and this huge garage. It should be converted into an ADU. It should support another 1 or 2 units. This is New York City. If you're not comfortable with density, you should move out, frankly. But that is not an attitude that I think is necessarily commonplace. And ADUs, despite being a success, I think policy-wise, if you can find that house under $1 million, here's another fun challenge for you. Find a contractor who can do the ADU for under $300,000 and who can do it in under a year. I mean, we still have all kinds of crazy rules and regulations, and it's just we're so far from being able to actually construct at the rate we need to.
And I think, ADUs are great. They don't really help our industry, right? I mean, they're great for like housing some
No.
more people, and which we want to house some more people. But if you're a lender, I mean, you're not in the ADU business. If you're a real
No.
estate agent, I mean, none of that kind of housing is really what we're talking about. It's not the bread and butter for most agents, for the majority of agents or brokers.
Yeah. I mean, I would like to see a place where policymakers and lenders are able to figure out a way to more easily fold in ADU, equity, and there are programs certainly, and a lot of banks will take a look at this, but it's not like you can go to Rocket and say, "Hey, I want to finance this ADU that's on my property." No, I don't want to do like a full refi. I don't want to just they're it's too far for the lenders right now. But I think if we had better policies that recognize, hey, this is an achievable way for us to meet some of that missing middle, and there are ways to weigh it so that you prioritize. Maybe you are able to, forgive certain parts of the debt or make the costs lower if you do give it to a family member, or it's occupied by someone from the neighborhood, or there are ways to incentivize it. But I mean, we barely have a coherent housing policy, in Statia, let alone like getting into the nitty gritty of like accessory dwelling units. So I'm probably too cynical on this, but I think we're still quite a few years away. And here where I am in New York, the state legislature basically batted down a proposal to legalize ADUs. So we're still in the infancy here.
We are. I thought Bill did a really good job of talking to. I mean, he talked to academics. He talked to tech people. He talked to fix and flip investors. He talked to people in the government to really go like, where is the bright spot here? What are people doing? And there were, but almost everybody in that story is like, this is just this tiny piece of the pie that we're trying to do the best we can here. But to your point, it feels like there's this national crisis that nobody's really tackling. And we actually published an opinion from Dave Stevens, who's a longtime industry vet from both. He was on the agency side. He was the FHA commissioner. He led the Mortgage Bankers Association. And he talked about how it should really be a priority for the Biden administration. And that that whole idea of a housing czar, which I know when I was in, last time we had that maybe was Henry Cisneros, which is dating me if you don't know who Henry Cisneros is. But it's
Folks
way back there because
folks in Texas probably know.
True, he is from Texas, but he was HUD secretary too. And I think that the whole thing is like, we have seen the Biden administration take some really focused stances on fair housing, on appraisal bias. So it's not like, there have been some administrations in my lifetime where you're like, housing is just, it's nowhere on the agenda. You can't find it. It's not in the debates. It's not on the policy. Nothing happens. That's not true of this administration, but housing, expanding housing is not really, I wouldn't say that's on the agenda.
Yeah, I think they've kind of nibbled at the edges of it, probably because they know it's hard to come up with a coherent policy that doesn't require congressional approval that will, without having to work through, say, like the FHFA or the FHA, really radically change the paradigm that we currently exist in. So it really means that you need to be a little bit more focused on which policies you could choose. And so to that point, Bill spoke to Lawrence Yun of the National Association of Realtors. He's their chief economist. And he said, okay, if we do want to increase supply, here is one way to do it. And it's very simple. Forgive some of the capital gains if you're, say, a fix and flip builder, rehabber, and you sell it to a first-time homeowner. Simple, right? That I can't imagine there would be a huge amount of objection to that, but you never know in this crazy place we live in. I think that's really smart. It often just comes down to financial incentives. And then the other is just, we've built this culture of bureaucracy and we have so much red tape. I was reading a story yesterday on the New York Times about converting office buildings into apartments. And friends and family often ask me, why don't we just take some of these big office buildings in New York or San Francisco or wherever and convert them into housing? It should be so simple. It's not. One, For starters, just there are very few developers who are able to do that kind of work. It is complicated engineering. It is not easy. The second big thing is the floor plates. So the physical size of the building and kind of the orientation and where the elevators go and the stairwells and all of what you've already constructed to make this an office building functions as an office space. That doesn't work for a residential building. There are only so many window units, right? Because most of an office doesn't actually have windows. And so you have all of these construction engineering issues, but then you also have this incredibly difficult series of regulations and codes. And so take a look at New York's original 1916 zoning code. It was 14 pages. That same zoning code today is 3,500 pages. And the New York Times quotes a developer in New York named Phil Wharton, and he says, I have a name for the buildup of that stuff. I call it kludge. And I think it underscores just how challenging it is for us to make any headway on even what should be a sensible, okay, we're living in a new era now. Remote work is here to stay. We don't have as much demand for these office buildings. We have this massive housing crisis. But in much of New York, the office building capital of America, we can only convert buildings that were built, I think it was like pre-1977. And so if it's a building in 1978, you can't do it.
And that's
And we're not
because
talking like architectural marvels, because that's the year they decided. That was the cutoff, and there was a proposal to change it, but it never went through. And then you have these cottage industries of consultants and people who kind of glom onto these issues, and they get paid every step of the way. And New York has, like, famously the most expensive infrastructure projects on earth. Like, to get anybody to do anything in the New York subway, it costs $1 billion, right? And so we've just created this really difficult culture where we can't build anything, and if we do, we can't build it in a cost-effective manner, and it touches everything across housing, across real estate.
it really does. So, I follow a ton of developers, and one of the things that, is very detrimental to building single family housing or even multi-family housing, any housing, is the parking requirements. So, if you have to
Yeah.
have a physical, if you have to have two parking places for a unit that can hold, or a house that can hold two people, so the house might be tiny. Now you got to have like two parking places for this small house. You got to have it. It's one of the things that really keeps development off of things. If just, we could think of the myriad number of local laws and regulations that make it so difficult to build. And, I think that maybe this is who do we have that has the political backbone and the political currency to step up and say, we're going to address this from a national level. I mean, it's hard to get anything passed. I mean, we barely got the budget passed. I know that's always a political football, but it's discouraging to be in this time where you feel like there isn't that sort of national leadership possible, not because we don't have people who maybe really care about it, but because we're in a pretty polarized situation. And different parts of government don't want to work with other parts of government. And, you could feel like housing could be the great, uniter. It's the American dream, but it really doesn't work like
Yeah.
that.
No, it doesn't. And so just getting back to kind of the initial question, if we agree with this synopsis that people with mortgage rates at 3% are selling, will we get any more inventory? If so, where would it come from? I think the answer to that question is there's a lot of encouraging data that the home builders are taking advantage of the situation, that they have very little competition now, and that they can charge, pretty solid prices. And even if they have to do a rate buy down or provide, upgraded finishes on a kitchen, they will absolutely have demand in the markets that they're trying to build housing. So I think that's really encouraging. They're at 30% right now. We're going to be speaking with experts, analysts, home builders in the next couple of weeks to get a better sense of where that capacity really is. Could they build 35%? Could they build 40%? Could they be 50% of the market? I don't know yet. I think probably with the supply chain issues and, they have to buy the land, right? It's quite a process from the home builder deciding to purchase something, land, and then actually get somebody in the door, right? But that could be a really, really strong area of growth in this country, but that will only touch areas in which home builders are incentivized to build. And you're not going to find home builders in suburban Boston. You're not going to find them outside New York City. You're going to find big multi-family developments, and in a lot of cases, those are apartments. Nobody's stupid enough to build condos, so that's not happening. And it's a challenging market. And then I think the other factor is there's this idea about the Airbnb, uh, crash coming. That's not going to happen. I know Logan talked about that last week with you, but that's unless we have interest rates that really shock the system and travel collapses, you're not going to find 1 million Airbnb units for sale. So this is probably the market that we're going to have for the foreseeable future.
And you did a deep dive on that this week, where for your data digest for the newsletter and for the article that reached out to people to really find out what was the true story. Because of course we had that viral tweet that everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, revenues are down 50% in some cities, and everyone's going to sell, and we're going to have this rush of inventory." And listen, we would love to have a rush of inventory, but it doesn't really work like that. So tell us why it doesn't work like that.
So it doesn't work like that because one, I think the data is pretty questionable. I talked to Jamie Lane, who's essentially the head of data and research at AirDNA, which tracks Airbnb pricing and occupancy and various other metrics. And he looked at that viral tweet and ran an analysis on the same marketplaces, same conditions, and his data was quite a bit different. And, on average, we're talking like a 3% correction, not 30, 40, 50%. The market that saw the biggest drop in revenue was New Orleans. And I think that checks out. There were a couple others that are in there, Austin, Phoenix, also dropping, but they're not dropping 30, 40, 50%. And I think most of the operators, one, could take a correction of 3 to 5 to 10% and still continue to run these as profitable businesses. But two, and just as important, is about 20% of Airbnbs are extended stays. They're 30 days or longer. So chances are those would not be homes that would be for sale listings. Another factor is, of course, that in a lot of cases, these are just private rooms. These are not entire homes.
These aren't even, they might be a couch, they might be a tent, they might
Right.
be a yurt, they might be
Sure.
tree house. They're not all at all like, here's an entire house.
Yeah. And so it doesn't really compute, like the numbers don't really wash. If, like I said, there's a huge travel crash, another pandemic hits, and maybe that's going to wipe out some people who are doing this and they'll want to sell. But I think more likely what we're going to see is if rates hold at 6, 7%, this is just a general statement, that will induce more sales. There are just going to be some people who can't hold on at 6,
Right.
7%. They lose a job, they relocate, whatever, they sell. And that's that. Maybe they return to being renters. But, we're not going to see, there is no single, under current conditions, single place we're going to see a big shock of inventory. It's going to look like this for a while, I think.
I agree. Well, James, thanks for coming on, sharing the insights from your newsroom, digging into these different things, because we know this is the pain point along with mortgage rates. They're tied together for our industry, whether, you're in title, appraisal, real estate, mortgage, this is the pain point. So thanks for coming on and guiding us through it.
Thanks, Sarah.